Yo, what is going down? Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the moonlight!
I am Austin Hayden, and I am joined by the Show Me the Meaning crew. We've got Raymond.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
And of course, Ryan.
What's up, film fans? How's it going?
And joining us once again from the phenomenal film podcast When Cinephiles Attack, we've got Rashawn.
What'd it do?
Returning champion.
Returning champion. So this week we're going to be celebrating Pride by tackling the 2016 Best Picture winner, Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins, written by Barry Jenkins and Terrell
We're sure
Alvin
on that. We're
McCraney.
sure we got the best picture. There was some conflicting. There was a conflict there at some point.
Yeah.
Oh,
After,
I mean,
we're sure.
we litigate
that
that right now? Okay.
Yes, we
Continue.
are certain. Okay, we've checked. We are certain. Moonlight is the winner.
God, good.
So it is co-written by Barry Jenkins and Terrell Alvin McCraney, based on McCraney's play In the Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. It stars Trevante Rhodes, Andre Holland, Janelle Monáe, who, if you've not listened to her music, you should listen to her music as well, Naomi Harris, and Mahershala Ali, as well as a few others that all do a phenomenal job. Everybody in this cast is friggin' stellar, which is something that I'm sure we'll talk about. But as always, we're going to go around and get first impressions. What was it like the first time we watched this film? What was it like on repeated viewings, however many times we've seen it? And then, of course, this most recent viewing. Let's start with Rashawn. Rashawn, what was it like the first time you saw this film? And how about subsequent viewings?
First time I saw this film, I was pretty speechless. I'm going to be heavily biased this episode, but that's okay. I think this movie is like a gift to me. It's one thing to kind of, check boxes of diversity and inclusion, but it's another to do that and actually be just a really fucking well-made movie. And I think across the board, there's just a ton of skill on display, and it's an aching, beautiful, heartbreaking movie that I love. I've watched it close to about 10 times since 2016. Wow. I love the score. I love the cinematography. Like you just said, the performances across the board are great. I relate obviously to this movie a lot, and we can talk about that later. But every time I watch it, I don't necessarily find something new about it, but there's so much to appreciate on every watch. And Moonlight, #1 fan. He's right here.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm curious as to what this film, there are certain films that, I don't know, like if there's philosophical meaning or there's some sort of like quippy dialogue or there's something flashy that it's like, oh shit, I never noticed that before. It almost feels like this film, rather than kind of like presenting these lateral things, will only suck you in deeper into the human experience, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of, it'll be curious to kind of like speak about how this film lasts. What's its staying power and why does it have that kind of gravitational pull inwards rather than kind of like showing you outwardly, oh, here are these, like a Nolan film, you're kind of like, oh, look at all these technical things. I never noticed that weird like flourish in the background that they're doing. This one is a very simple film in a lot of ways, but it's also very complex in its simplicity. So that'll be interesting to kind of explore on the other side of the breakdown or the synopsis as well. Ryan, what about you, brother? What was it like the first time you saw it, and how about subsequent viewings?
So the first time I saw it, I definitely, well, I guess my overall thing I would say about this film is that I respect the hell out of it, and I don't necessarily love watching it, right? It's like y'all said, it's such a well-made movie. You can tell, I love some of the editing juxtapositions and stuff, like the hard cuts at the really important moments. So he gets form and stuff in a really good way. It's such a subdued movie. I think you said it perfectly, Austin, that it's such a simple film and it's complex in its simplicity, or however you described it. And so for me as a person who loves movies, like I love everything it's saying and the whole what it's about, and breaking it down I'm sure is going to be awesome here on this podcast. But the process of watching the 2-hour film, I kind of am like, oh yeah, I'll explain what I'm going to say in a second, but like I didn't realize it was a play before the first time I saw it, and then the second time I'm watching, I'm like, this feels so much like a play, and then I looked it up, and sure enough, it's a play, right? And so I guess my question, or my main thing, I'm watching it is going like, yeah, this is good, but like I'm like, does it justify becoming a movie? Obviously, it's the Best Picture winner, so fuck me. What do I know? But like when I'm watching it, and I'm like, even the second time, it's like I'm not, loving it, and obviously that's like, you could obviously say, yeah, this movie's not made for me at all, like in a sense, but also it's so universal too. So I think it is absolutely something for everybody in the film. But like, yeah, the process, it's a very slow film, and I'm kind of like, did it need to become a film? I don't know. I would love to see the play, and I bet it would be a very powerful play, and it's a very powerful movie too. So like I don't mean to discount it, but it's just more. Those were kind of my bare first thoughts as I was that I collected as I was watching it the second time there. Sorry to burst everyone's bubble if this was going to be one where we all love the movie.
No. Let's make a mental note of that, because I think you're highlighting something that's interesting. Again, this is about adaptations that we've talked about a lot on this film, is how do you adapt a story? I heard Tom Hanks say something once that I think was absolutely brilliant. He said, film is for directors, TV is for writers, and theater is for actors. And Terrell McCraney is an actor, a writer. He's part of Steppenwolf. So he kind of like bridges that divide. But there is something about, I'm a theater geek, and I live and work often in the theater, and there is something about the theater that is very unique, and then trying to transition and make something that is very sort of performance heavy, actor heavy, spectacle heavy, live driven, and it's written with that in mind, and then to try to convert that and to turn that into a screenplay is a challenge. And so we can definitely talk about how Jenkins and McCraney did that together, and to what effects, we might say, right? And the challenges that it presents. But go ahead, Raymond, what about you, brother?
Well, my first impressions of this film, I actually, the first time that I saw it was in theaters with you, Rashawn, and you had seen it before that, and you were enraptured by it, and I remember going to the movie and thinking, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this movie, but I'm also kind of looking forward to experiencing this with you. And there's, of course, that part of me as a friend that's like, God, I really want to like this for him. And, listeners may not know this, but Rashawn and I have a very long history of butting heads on movies in a major way. And I enjoyed the film from the first time that I saw it. But you and I even had this discussion yesterday, off mic, obviously, where there was kind of a weight or a gravity to it that seeing it in theaters was kind of one of those things that was like, well, I know this is an important film. It's being heralded as such, and it's important to a person that I love, and I want to understand it. And I think I went in with a certain kind of like expectation or a sense of like gravity or responsibility surrounding it in a way that made me feel like I was maybe just working a little too hard in the theater. And then I rewatched it for the podcast yesterday or the day before, and I just loved it. I let it wash over me, and we've maybe get into discussions about, is it a movie? Is it a play? There was an interview that I read with Terrell McCraney where he was saying that this play from the start, to him, the writer, always felt like it should have been a movie. And to wit, it's very, very difficult to find any evidence of the play's existence other than the fact that there's a bunch of interviews about how this was a play before it became an award-winning movie. Like, I can't find the script for the play online. I think, Rashawn, you said it's never even been performed anywhere or staged anywhere. That this was...
Really?
Yeah, I guess Terrell McCraney, maybe it was workshopped at some point, but to the best of my knowledge, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I've read that it never made it on its feet, and it only made it to Barry Jenkins through a friend of a friend. So it is just this weird kind of like twisted road to the screen where it goes through this sort of labor stage of being a play without ever having been fully sort of realized on a stage. But I think it fits right at home on the silver screen, and that's not to diminish your critique of it, Ryan. But I just think there is, watching this movie, I'm reminded of the adage that the greatest special effect in cinema history is always just going to be emotion. And watching this, it's just beautiful use of close-up. There's some beautiful use of asynchronous dialogue where Barry Jenkins will just kind of hold these characters in these close-ups while their dialogue plays without their lips moving or anything like that. There's all these little flourishes that you couldn't realize on a stage, or maybe you could. You can do a lot of creative things in that space, but I think that this is a perfect example of someone, and sorry, there's a plane going overhead here. This is a perfect example of someone taking material and reformatting, adapting it for a different medium in a way that breathes entirely new life into the material, that really makes it its own thing, separate from the play. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, so I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it I was much more interested in, let's say, the social, cultural thematics of it, and it's phenomenal, right? I think, as Rashawn was saying, for issues of inclusion, diversity, representation, et cetera, it ticks all those boxes, and I think it's actually going to be really interesting for us to say, like, what does it mean to tick those boxes in a way that isn't tokenizing, but in a way that is sort of like truthfully expressive. And then when somebody has an opportunity to be able to bring a story that it is just simply from a peripheral voice, what does that mean for the industry? What does that mean for storytelling? What does that mean in general for a cosmopolitan society, right? And I think that's where my mind was the first time I saw it. This time going into it, to be honest, I was a little bit apprehensive because I didn't know if it would live up to my memory and to the hype. And I also was kind of like, fuck, man. Like, we just got into lockdown here in Sydney, and I know the rest of the world is like, boo-hoo-hoo. What is this year? Like, 2 weeks of lockdown? We've been in lockdown for a year and a half. Well, for us, it's like everyone is freaking out. And so there's a lot of anxiety and stuff that's happening here in Sydney because we just had this outbreak, right? So I was kind of like, fuck, man, this is just a heavy film right now, and I'm not sure I'm in the mood for something heavy. I kind of want to do something jovial, but I ended up kind of really getting not just the storyline and all the themes that I just mentioned, but I got really sucked in by the artistic design and the production design, particularly some of the staging, this cafeteria where there's all these red doors in a line, and that's absolutely beautiful. And when young Chiron is with his mom and there's like this purple light behind her, it's like a purple on the one side and kind of a pink light on the other. There was something about the mood and the tonality through the form of cinematic skill and technical prowess that really kind of resonated with me on this viewing that I didn't pay as much attention to the first time around. And so it was kind of lovely to kind of get that side of things as well. So for me, that was one of the lovely things about watching it on this second viewing. So, okay, real quick, I'm going to go into a quick recap, and then we'll start kind of peeling back some layers and seeing if we can kind of get into some goodies here. So the film basically unfolds over 3 episodes in Chiron's life: his youth, his adolescence, and his early adulthood. During his youth, Chiron befriends Juan, an older drug dealer in the neighborhood, who serves as a surrogate father while his mother is descending deeper into addiction and poverty. Juan teaches Chiron how to be a man, but also, and more importantly, how to learn to be accepting of who he is, that is, in due time. In his teen years, Chiron is mocked by classmates for being gay. He sparks up an unlikely romance with a classmate, Kevin, who, after their first sexual interaction, ends up being kind of prodded to beat Chiron up so that he can maintain his status with the other classmates. Chiron gets beaten up pretty bad, and after he heals up a bit, he ends up coming to school, takes a chair, and smashes it over the back of the head and, I guess, back of the classmate that urged Kevin to beat Chiron up in the first place. Chiron is, of course, arrested and sent to juvie. The final episode gives us a grown-up Chiron living in Atlanta selling drugs. One night, Kevin calls him and offers to cook him a meal if he's ever back in town. So after visiting his mother in rehab, Chiron heads over to Kevin's restaurant and catches up with him. He learns that Kevin has a child, and after an awkward encounter in the restaurant, they end up back at Kevin's, where Chiron confesses that Kevin is the only person who's ever touched him. Kevin embraces Chiron and softly strokes his head as the frame cuts to a young Chiron looking at the ocean in the moonlight just before he turns over his shoulder and looks directly at us. End of the film. It's a very brief synopsis, but I feel like, as we talked about, in the simplicity, there's so much complexity. So those are kind of the broad strokes, but we'll start peeling those layers back a little bit. But first, I do have to give a shout out to our sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online community where you can connect with other like-minded people and creatives, and where you can explore projects that you are passionate about. And this is why Skillshare is so cool, because you can unleash your creativity and you can pursue your passions right from the convenience of your own home. They offer thousands of different classes for creative and curious people on topics such as iPhone photography, drone filming, video for Instagram, classes on improving your productivity, activism at the intersection of art, called Artivism, that is basically creating and inspiring artistic creations for social change, etc., etc. It's for experts and for people who are novices or people who are just starting to try to learn about something, maybe to pick up a new skill set that you haven't been introduced before. So if you want to explore your creativity and if you want to connect with some cool people, go to Skillshare.com/SMTM. That's Skillshare.com/SMTM, and you'll get a free trial of their premium membership. So if you want a free trial of the premium membership, Skillshare.com/SMTM. And of course, there's also a link down in the show notes that you can click as well. So, okay, Rashawn,
Yes.
I was going to say not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. You were saying number one fan, and you said that this film struck you at a personal level. Obviously within your comfort zone. Can you elaborate on this and talk about what this film means for you?
Sure. I'm a queer black man. I grew up middle class in the suburbs of Virginia, so does not compare to where this film takes place. But I guess I said that to say that, you know, I've never seen a movie like this. You know, I've never seen a movie where someone like me, it would be the main character. And those representations in TV and film across the board are few and far between. So that was a big plus for me. That was what got me into the theater, with the exception of the trailer, which I think was just incredible. And that was the hook, but I think that's not enough to really, you know, I won't just put a film in my like top 10 of all time just because, you know, it's about a gay black guy. That's just like tokenism that I'm not interested in, you know. Right. I think what the movie does is it takes that specificity, it takes the setting of Miami, it takes this coming of age story and this beautiful kind of romantic chapter in the end, and it kind of folds all that into one man's experience. I just feel like it just feels like a poem, you know. Some of the shots, like you mentioned about the Paula in the hallway and the purple bluish light behind her. It's just mixing, you know, a chopped and screwed version of Goody Mob with, you know, classical scoring, and it's just the marriage of all those things. The
score rules.
It's so good. I mean, the Wong Kar-wai influences are all over the movie. I just rewatched Happy Together the other day before I watched Moonlight, and Barry talks about, you know, how much he is influenced by In the Mood for Love, Happy Together, Chungking Express. So I think to put all of those things into one film, whether Chiron is a gay black man or not, I think this is just something that hasn't been attempted before, and to do it and do it successfully is kind of what I love about the movie.
Yeah, I was watching it. Go ahead. Go real quick, Wyan. Before we, I was just going to ask, like, this issue of tokenizing is something that kind of like wears on me a little bit, because I don't really know when is it tokenizing and when is it good to just kind of have representation. So I was watching this film and I was like, the question in my mind, and I was even saying this to someone, I was saying like Like the thought that like the typically that you hear is like, what does this film mean for the Black queer community? And then I was like, is that even asking too much? Is that a tokenizing question itself? Like, why does a film have to mean something for the community? And I feel like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it isn't doing that because it isn't just trying to tick boxes, but rather it's such a personal and expressive story in its singularity that if it has universal appeal, that's because of the kind of commonality of the human experience, like being a marginalized a part of a marginalized community, rather than kind of like reversing it and being like, oh, we're just going to try to tell a story so that we can, I don't know, appeal to some sort of external standard or something like that. And that's where the poetry comes from, because it kind of emerges from the truth, from the base, from the human, rather than kind of being like abstract. Do you think that there's something to that?
Yeah, like the movie doesn't exist because Chiron is gay and Black. He is gay and Black in this movie, and that's part of his character, and that's part of his development and coming of age. And he just so happens to grow up into a man who loves another man. I don't think there's any, even with, you know, his circumstances, his mother being an addict, he still is, it doesn't like devolve into poverty porn, and it's not really like waiting in the trauma. There's like a yearning for hopeful feeling, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan. Go ahead. What were you going to say, brother?
I was just going to say, I'm glad that you told me that he has Wong Kar-wai influences, because that makes so much fucking sense. Because a lot of the stuff that I said in my critique of the movie, I would apply to a lot of Wong Kar-wai movies, you know?
Yeah.
And I love him, by the way. It's just that he also has that very slow, subdued way of filming a scene and is telling a story. And it's one of those different strokes for different folks kind of things. I mean, this is an art film first and foremost. I feel like it's not for like, oh, this is a party movie I want to throw on a Saturday night with all my buddies. Like this is a meditative story, and the fact that takes, you know, a whole life. You know, like I love that it has the chapter, you know, the 3 beginning, middle, and end chapters, you know, and you're following a guy throughout his, you know, I guess half his life. I mean, that alone is relatable to anybody, you know, just watching somebody grow up and then seeing them change. It's just that with Wong Kar-wai and I guess Barry Jenkins, it's like, you know, the last 35 minutes of this movie can be summed up in guy goes to diner, man cooks him food, they walk up to his they have an awkward conversation, and then they hug at the end, and that's like 30 minutes of filming. You know what I mean? And to me, it reminded me of like another filmmaker, Gus Van Sant. You know, who will like obviously have these. Like that's part of his medium is in style is just these long, almost excruciating shots of just real time things happening. You know, like we were watching like those 2 guys hang out in the last part of the movie in real time. It's like you're hanging out. You know, it's naturalism of filmmaking that not many people can pull off, and I think he does do a good job for it. It's just like, is that your thing or not?
Well, see, part of the beauty, I think, of that final episode is precisely, though, that you have 2 people who communicate in different ways. Kevin is charming, charismatic. He always has been. He's boisterous. He's a shit talker, right? And you have Chiron, who cannot express himself. And it's not just verbally, it's personally, it's his identity. There is this fundamental stopgap. And so the 30 minutes of the time... of the time with them is highlighting almost the excruciating impossibility of Chiron able to communicate in a world, because he doesn't have a place in a world, which is why I got chills when I watched the ending this time, because I kind of forgot what he says at the end to Kevin, but it isn't, I've never been touched by a man since you. It was a person. And I was like, holy fuck, like, intimacy, touch, and this man being isolated and like radical isolation. And he's always been withdrawn. He's always had some sort of problem with self-expression. And you get that wonderful conversation with Juan where, you know, Chiron's asking what the F word means, and Juan is basically like, you know, like, you'll find out who you are, but don't worry so much. Like, it'll come in time, is kind of the gist of the conversation. And it's this man who is dealing with learning how to express himself over time. And I think the fact that it's slow cinema in a way really kind of enhances that struggle, that impossibility, and that difficulty. And I definitely got in the mood for love vibes watching this last night, 100%. So yeah,
it definitely has that Wong Kar-wai vibe of heavy on story, light on plot, that sort of thing. Yeah. Where they accomplish so much with and to that end, this was something we discussed yesterday, Rashawn, but as much as I think each individual chapter has its merits, I think that if I had to nitpick something, in the second chapter, it feels a little bit like they're trying to force some plot onto him in a way, in kind of in a similar way that I feel like the middle years of Boyhood kind of hit a little bit of a slump when they're trying to like force a narrative trajectory onto this kid's life. And obviously there's like, I don't want to fault it for that, because that middle chapter has to accomplish so much, whereas the first and the third chapters are just pure poetry. Especially the first chapter, where Chiron isn't really like, he's not necessarily proactive. He's not necessarily like the story's agent or protagonist. He's kind of just subject to the whims of the adults in his life. And then in the third film, he's kind of like, in the third chapter, he has a similar sort of energy about him, that he is kind of like subject to not just the traumas of his past, but the implications or the weight of his experience. And it's one of those things that's kind of really beguiling about that third chapter, that I mentioned to you, Rashawn, that when he meets up with Andre Holland in that scene, and they just sit down with a plate of food between them, and Trevante Rhodes just starts beaming in that scene at one point, and it's just like, Austin, you said you didn't want to watch something that was this depressing right now because things are a little bit hectic over where you are. But man, by that third chapter, it really feels like it's all worth it. Like everything that you've experienced with him, it like the crucible that character endures in those first two chapters. By the third one, you get this sense that like, oh no, like this is maybe the first time he's not that he's smiled, but that he feels like in his body, like, and he feels happy, and he feels like he has found like, not necessarily that this is going to be the end of his story, or that they're going to end up together and be happy forever or everything, but this is like, oh no, like he's a ship that has found the correct harbor for once at least, and like he's just where he needs to be right now, and right now that's good enough.
There's something interesting you say, like, oh, go ahead, Rashawn.
Sorry, I do love the third chapter. I don't find it as hopeful as you do, because I think the movie in a very subtle way has to deal with kind of internalized homophobia, especially in the Black community. And in the first chapter, he doesn't really know who he is or what he is. He doesn't even know what being gay means. And then he comes like smack up against it in the middle of the movie, where someone is blatantly bullying him, kind of because that I forget his name, Terrell, I think it is. He might also be gay as well, and he pushes to get Kevin to beat him up, and so all of that happens to him, and he kind of builds this layer of a persona, and he becomes Black. And it's not until the end of the movie where the only person that has really been able to kind of break through to him kind of tears all that away again. And it took like almost to he was damn near 30 for him to maybe, hopefully in the future, he'll feel comfortable in his skin. But even when he gets to the diner, it's like, what are you doing? Take the chain off, take that grill out.
The front.
And he, like Kevin calls him out on everything. And he's like, okay, let me just take these teeth out. What am I doing? So I don't think he's fully formed yet, but he found the person again who kind of sees like straight through him. And so when they go to his apartment at the end, it's kind of like, well, this is hopeful. Like things could get better, but he's kind of like a lot of black men do. A lot of black men are on the down low because the society, their friends, their family just want them to bottle it all in. And he doesn't talk. He doesn't outwardly express anything. And then he meets his person that could possibly, maybe in the future, get him to change that.
Yeah, by no
that was
means
interesting
do I think
too.
He has. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, too, how even his physicality from youth to teen to bodied up Trevante Rhodes, right? Like, and he spends a lot of time, you know, they've got the tiny little montage scene when he's listening to the message from his mom where he's doing push-ups and he's doing curls. And so it's kind of like, is this a way of him dealing with masculinity while also suppressing whatever it is in terms of his libidinal desires, and the only outlet that he can allow himself is some sort of like sculpting of the form? Is he playing a role? Like, what is it? And there's a slight mention to it. You know, Kevin says it doesn't look like you're skipping any meals, right? So there's also a mention of that okay, he's focused on these other things as well as the ways that he can express himself, because he can't express himself otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that I didn't mean to imply that he is like fully formed. I think I had even said that I think in chapter 3, it's even reflected, I think, in the chapter subtitle, probably intentionally, that he is playing a character in a certain way, because, and especially considering the fact that, you know, Andre Holland's character, Kevin, he's the one who's constantly calling him black or referring to him as black in the second chapter. And it is that thing, like I said, where chapter 1 and chapter 3, he does feel like he is not necessarily, I don't want to say he's an object in this world, but he is subject to the whims of either familial pressure or societal pressure, in a way that I also think the script kind of implies Kevin is. Obviously, like, with regards to what you were just saying, there is a lot of external and internal homophobia, especially in certain communities, but we never really get a very clear sense on how Kevin sees himself as a sexual being. Like, he has a son. Is he closeted? Is he bisexual? Like, how does he identify? And there is that notion that, like, all the time we've been spending with Chiron, that there is kind of not necessarily a mirror sort of arc that Kevin has been experiencing, but you definitely understand there has been a story happening between these chapters for him as well, that implies that, like, once again, these, like I said, this might be just the right place for right now, where, who knows, they may just pass like 2 ships in the night again and go another 10 years without seeing each other. Yeah.
What do we think about the final shot then? So you have this lovely embrace where Kevin is he's holding him and gently stroking his head, which I think is one of the more, it's such a powerful choice to make it that, rather than them kissing or having sex. Like, you don't know there's something about it, because it's so much like, I'm just a human that's just going to embrace you and accept you, which is almost even more powerful than just like a libidinal expression. Not that that can't also be an act of acceptance, but there's something so beautiful about it. And then there's like this hard cut to young Chiron, under the moonlight, which is basically a sort of direct allusion to the quote that Juan talks about, that is also the title of the play, right? The Black Boys Look Blue, or in the moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. And then it's this serene looking out at the ocean. What is the ocean? Is the ocean hope? Is the ocean the horizon? Is the ocean freedom? And then he's standing there, maybe with hope, and then he turns back and looks directly at us. And so what I wonder is this kind of like a reverse foreshadowing? It's kind of like this is almost like the film Irreversible. Like, you've seen the tragedy that happens in a life, and then how can you look at a black boy that's repressed under these conditions and then look at them with a sense of hopefulness, knowing the destiny that they're going to fulfill, the poverty, the life that they're going to be sucked into, the inability to express itself? Is that the tragic moment where then you look at a young boy, which could be any young boy in a similar circumstance, right? and then you say, oh, we know how this ends, and therefore that's where the tragic element comes in. What do we think about that last shot?
Well, tying the last image, and to go back to not the last image, but the image of Trevante Rhodes and Andre Holland together, just to tag that, there is something really beautiful about seeing Trevante Rhodes, who, like you said, is like cut from marble in this movie, reduced to like not necessarily
being
infantile, yeah, but
almost
it's someone who is requiring someone else for support, and who is like actually giving himself over. Like you get the implication that his physical transformation between chapters 2 and chapter 3 may have something to do with the incredible trauma that he's endured and having to build this physical shell around him so that he's unfuckwithable. But by the time you cut from Trevante Rhodes to I'm sorry, does anyone know the child actor's name? He's wonderful in the film. Who plays Chiron? Alex Hibbert, right. When you cut from Black to Little, there is that implication that, oh, this could be, I don't necessarily know that this is what they're going for, but at least how I read it was this notion that as each and every one of these chapters roughly takes something of the same shape, it could be this suggestion that a lot of this is cyclical in the way that trauma always, not always, but trauma does have a tendency to repeat itself. Trauma becomes self-sustaining, the way that people carry it with them, like a Newton's cradle, until they can pass it to someone else, and then before they know it, it comes swinging back. And it is one of those things that does, if you want to give a pessimistic reading of it, it implies that, once again, like we were saying before, he's not out of the woods yet, like he has these little breaths, like some of those beautiful moments with Mahershala Ali in the first chapter. Janelle Monáe's fucking incredible in her moments opposite the first two Chirons. There are these moments where you feel some sense of reprieve, but they are short-lived, and it's kind of that concern by the end of the film that, oh, is this just another dot in that same pattern?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like I said, it is hopeful, but
you said not as hopeful as I thought it was. So I'm trying to make your argument here. Don't swing this back.
No,
on
it
me.
is. There's a running motif of water, and in the first chapter, of course, there's the scene that everyone probably has seen, whether you've seen Moonlight or not. Juan takes him out and teaches him how to swim. Yeah. And then throughout the rest of the movie, anytime something really traumatic happens or something overwhelming, he takes a bath. He has to, boil the water at home and take his own bath.
Or the ice in the
beat
sink.
up, and he kind of washes his face. And then the last time you see him as Black, he's dunking his head in ice water. So it's that continuing, maybe like a cyclical thing where he has to not necessarily start over, but just kind of wash away any kind of
it's a baptism
edifice.
Kind of like a rebirth. And obviously
it's a rebirth.
And obviously the Pentecostal and charismatic influences within the Black community in the United States are so deep and so ubiquitous that I can't imagine that wasn't an intentional nod to, especially the way that he's cradling him in the water. It is very much like a John the Baptist baptizing Jesus or something like that, It definitely felt like that to me.
I also love the subtle like story suggestion by going from the first time that we see Chiron dunk his head in the sink full of ice is after he gets beaten up by Kevin and Terrell and the other guys. And then when we see Black doing it in the third chapter, it does not appear that he's, trying to bring down any swelling or whatever. I just like this sort of weird story suggestion that maybe when he did that the first time after getting the shit kicked out of him, he was like, yeah, obviously I'm not happy about getting the shit kicked out of me, but this feels so nice. Like this is just his own little, like, just his kind of corner of serenity, like this weird thing that he discovered almost incidentally, and he has returned to it, I would assume, often enough that it becomes a leitmotif in the film even though we've jumped 10 years into the future. Like, I wonder how many like sink ice baths he's had in the interim that he's just like, I just need, like, this is just my fucking little space where I can just close out the world and close out everything.
Yeah, it's the last time someone's held him, you know, was when he was in the ocean with Juan, and so he just kind of returns. Sorry, Ryan.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I was just gonna say that what I got out of that last shot, to me, that was like what really made it. That was like the saddest shot of the movie. Like that makes it a Shakespearean experience where and I kind of took it as a like almost like a call to action, like literally looking straight down the camera at the audience, like, don't let this happen, you know, to like change society, please, you know, so that this doesn't have to be this story anymore. We can stop telling this story, you know, and also, the fact that it's that old saying, you know, like if I would have known now would have known back then what I would know now, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like obviously he has his whole life to leave, and you know exactly what's about to happen. We've seen it. We just spent an hour and 50 minutes watching it, and so it's this tragic shot of him you're like this helpless boy that's going to live, you know, go on this road, and you can't do anything about it. But yeah, I think that we are supposed to, as the audience, leave the theater going, that was a tragedy, you know, like, and then you're supposed to look inward and be like, we got to change, and not make this kid's story happen again.
Yeah, it has a dreamlike quality to it, and I kind of wondered last night. I was like, was that an intentional? Yeah, what are we supposed to be like? This film is a sort of like fantastic journey into the future of what is going to happen for this particular young boy. Or is it something, I mean, it's probably a little bit of that, right? And then there's also maybe something else that's kind of saying, like you just said, it's a call to action, because this is a tragic tale of like, this little boy could be any little boy, under similar circumstances. And this is something that will just self-perpetuate if things stay the same. And so that's where the call to action comes from. And that's why it's a very singular story, because it's a semi-autobiographical story in the first place, right? And so, but at the same time, in philosophical terms, we sometimes talk about what's called a singular universal. It's that in the singular thing, the entire history or the entire totality is contained. You just kind of have to do enough peeling back of the layers and scraping beneath the surface, right, to kind of really see those hidden components of a singular life. And I think that's kind of one of the things that you get here, is a much more universal tale, but that's compressed within a very sort of singular, unique experience. And it's that tension between the two, the uniqueness and the particularity, but then also that universality, and kind of navigating the contradiction between those two is a really interesting space, and creates, and that's why I love what Rashawn said about how this is poetic. It just feels like a cinematic poetic that just is like bursting forth, like there's a bounty there that is almost limitless that you can keep exploring.
And it accomplishes all of that without being didactic or sanctimonious in any way. And that's, I think, key to its power. You know, this is, if you want to talk about like, was it the very next year that Green Book won Best Picture after this one did?
Yeah.
Which is very much like the old Hollywood model of how to do like a message movie, and like this is how you solve racism, by teaching one Italian guy not to use the N-word or whatever. And it is just one of those things where it's like, no, you can just make a movie about like a person as an individual. Like, it doesn't have to be freighted with all that kind of baggage, it doesn't have to wear that on its sleeve.
Yeah, like, I don't want to take this conversation too far afield, but, you know, one of the other films we were thinking about discussing was Tangerine, right? Which is another kind of interesting, singular exploration of a unique voice that then kind of shines the mirror on the audience and says, okay, this is the world. And then you kind of have to confront the universal reality of the world by just looking at this singular, marginalized story. And I think that's when it doesn't become didactic. That's when it doesn't become too on the nose and too preachy. And it isn't that there's something wrong with like teaching somebody a lesson. It's just that it oftentimes feels inauthentic, especially if it's driven by like the Hollywood machine, right? You're like, wait a second here. So it's always a tricky landscape to navigate, I think, if you're going to try to tell these more inclusive stories.
And credit to Barry Jenkins, because I think both this and I haven't seen Medicine for Melancholy, but If Beale Street Could Talk, I think is also just a heart-achingly beautiful movie that is just about an individual's experience that reflects greater cultural or societal pressures and expectations without having to like be about that in big bold letters and stuff. It's such a good movie.
About it too being subdued and not being so preachy of it doesn't feel like a message movie, which is good. But I do think that culturally you have to come kind of knowing the context and circumstances of this guy's environment and kind of the the mores of the time. And ironically, I think kind of how we were talking about how this movie is a call to action for society almost at the end, like in a weird way, in let's say 50, 70 years or something, when hopefully this is a foreign concept, like the people having to hide, their sexuality and stuff. Like I can see this kind of people looking back at Moonlight almost like, wow, that's a really dated film. It's almost like a Guess Who's Coming to Dinner of our time, where like that made, that made sense to everyone in 2021 or whatever, but like now it's like, obviously we don't think about that. I mean, obviously that's the goal, and who knows if we're going to get there as society, but that's kind of interesting to me that this is kind of, I think, a movie of its time in a way. Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah. I mean, this has the distinction. I think it's the first movie with an entirely black cast to ever win Best Picture. And that's that's an achievement, but it's also, at the moment, it's singular. So I think if you've never seen Moonlight before the whole La La Land mix-up, that's what you know Moonlight for. And then people kind of bring their own ideas about, well, it won because it was black, it won because this, and politics, and you can't watch a movie in a vacuum, especially if you're well versed in film. You kind of bring all of that into a viewing of a movie. So I agree with you that 10, 20 years down the line, if there's 4 or 5 more Moonlights, then it won't be so specific. Moonlight will have won because Barry Jenkins and Terrell did their job, and it's an incredible film. And the sheen of this one, because it was a black movie, won't really exist anymore, because we'll start awarding Moonlights more. And hopefully, the future will look a little different. But right now it stands out so much because it's the only one.
And not necessarily just awarding them, but just having more and more access to them. So the movie's very existence is not like something exceptional or something to be gawped at or whatever. I think we touched on this briefly in the Wonder Woman 1984 episode, that it's kind of unfair regardless of the movie's quality. Like Moonlight, I think, is a brilliant film. Wonder Woman 1984, not so much. But it's very unfair for either movie to have to like shoulder the entire burden of representation for for certain demographics or demographic intersections.
Yeah, and that's something we put on the movie itself. It's not like the filmmakers are doing
and I
that.
think
that's just like a movie press thing.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things where this film succeeds so much is it never is playing that game. It's just in the business of telling a really beautiful story. But that's the kind of thing that who knows, someone could come into this exercise or this production with a more cynical outlook on it and say, well, it's important because we're the first to tell this kind of story with this kind of budget and yada yada yada, and hopefully that, like, once again, that burden of representation won't be squarely on the shoulders of the movie that won the award for it.
Oh, for sure. But there are always going to be people that are going to have that more cynical, or they're going to have like the dollar signs in their eyes, or whatever it is. They're going to try to score social points or something like that. That's always going to be an issue, right? But
if it gets us more movies of this quality,
Yeah. Well, then fuck it. Then maybe it's worth it in the end. Yeah, that's one of the things I do wonder, right? So you get it's kind of like but it's like it's just ticking the boxes in order to kind of like have representation. It's like, yeah, but you know what? Sometimes let's just produce stuff. Like, let's just make the stuff, right? And sometimes you just need to do it. And even if you sit there in your principles and you're like, but it wasn't perfectly, entirely 100% according to the ethics of how something should be made. Like, fuck, no movie is ever made perfectly ethically. No piece of art is, I mean, not maybe no, but I mean, maybe it's the case. Like, maybe we shouldn't be so rigid with trying to control how it is that everything is made. And sometimes it's just like, you know what? Fuck it. It served a good purpose in the end. And I don't want to just do the ends justifies the means as like a blanket thing. But maybe sometimes that's okay to think in those ways. I don't really know, but I do feel like that sometimes, that maybe we need to just stop like waiting because maybe that's a way to protect ourselves, because we're like waiting for our consciousness to catch up. But why do we have to wait for like, I don't know, 80% of the globe to be on board and to be ethically kind of aligned before we can produce the right kind of art, or 80% of the filmmaking process has to be totally ethically derived? Like maybe you just gotta kind of fucking get shit done sometimes, you know, kick down some doors.
The double-edged sword of independent filmmaking. You know, on the one hand, you don't incur the economic risk that would isolate those types of movies from being a 4-quadrant approach. But on the other hand, with notable exceptions, I think Moonlight being an obvious one, a lot of the time movies of this budget range just they never reach escape velocity and find a much bigger audience beyond that. So,
I mean, this was unfortunately the lowest grossing Best Picture winner if we're talking awards and stuff. But I don't think most people really care about who wins Best Picture. But I mean, this was a huge deal when it won, obviously.
But that said, there is a large subset of the viewing audience, or the would-be viewing audience, that sees a Best Picture Oscar and goes, okay, now I'll check it out, you know?
Yeah. And I think the great thing too is, like, speaking about representation and like these new platforms and new outlets, I was working with a producer in LA by the name of Rob Williams, who used to work with Michael Mann, and he works for like BET and stuff like that on a lot of the originals. And one of the young directors that we worked with is a guy named Kyle Adrian Scott, who directed the Bobby Brown miniseries, those episodes. And Kyle is like one of these like up and coming young black directors that is, was taken under the wing of like Spike Lee. I think he was Spike Lee's assistant for a while. And it's like those types of stories and the opportunities that Kyle gets to direct the Bobby Brown story when he's like, what was he, 27 years old or something like that. That now when Moonlight, and this is a few years back now, right? So now when a film like Moonlight wins, Kyle is the kind of voice that can become like another Ryan Coogler, or that can do the next thing. And those are the opportunities that do come from these things, even if it's not like it's on BET and you might be like, oh, okay, how many people watch BET? Not as many as watch Netflix or something like that. Nevertheless, people behind the scenes, the producers, the money people, they are aware of these stories. And so it's almost like I don't want to say like a farm league, because then that diminishes the actual artistic output, but it's definitely a breeding ground, an opportunity for more creatives to be able to have outlets. And then it also kind of like creates a pathway, and it carves a path for other bigger budget films, other more important films, prestige films. Fucking more important. That again, it sounds like I'm denigrating the content,
Sure.
but
I get
in the
what
eyes
you're
of the
saying.
public, you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to get at. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing is important, and I think that's why it matters. That's why it matters, because those opportunities do get carved out. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any final thoughts here? Are there any other themes that we haven't explored that you think we cannot miss? Is there something about the direction, something about the writing? Is there something about McCraney, anything like that? Do you want to talk about it? Theater. I mean, I'm always down to go down the theater route. I'm sure our audience would fucking be like, no, do not talk about theater, please. But is there anything else, Rashawn? Is there anything in particular that you wanted to bring up before we wrap up this discussion?
Yeah. Two aspects of the movie that I really latch onto are James Laxton is the cinematographer, and Nicholas Bertel, who did the score. I think those are two very integral pieces of the movie, especially a lot of people don't know how to like black people, just gonna say it. And this is a movie that takes black people of all different shades and just puts them on camera in a beautiful light. And I really just that's kind of a first, because it doesn't always happen.
And they also oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, dovetailing off of the cinematography that you mentioned, Ryan, to address what you kind of started the episode with, I think another thing that distinguishes this as a cinematic statement as opposed to a theatrical one is they do try not only the asynchronous thing that I had mentioned before, but they're capturing these images at a lot of different shutter speeds. Like they're clearly like playing around and experimenting, and there are some of those scenes like when he's in the bathroom and there's that sort of halogen buzz of the lights, and they're capturing it at a shutter speed where the lights will flicker, which happens a lot on digital cameras. I'm pretty sure this was shot digitally and not on film. But there's just like it feels intentional though, the way that they're doing it. Like they're just kind of bumping the shutter speed a little bit to give you some texture on the frame in a way that really does. Like I said, I think it was probably at the forefront of their minds when going into this, that we can't just shoot the play. We've got to actually make this thing its own kind of statement. And I don't know. Good movie. That's all I've got to say.
Great movie. Yeah. And Nicholas Britell, I think he's just incredible across the board. Anytime he scores something, Succession, Beale Street, he's just great. And then the last thing I'll say is I know that I bring a lot to this movie. Everyone brings their own baggage or background to a movie, but I think Moonlight transcends any kind of diversity or politics by just being a well-made movie, best picture or not. I think it's just well crafted, like I said in the beginning. So yeah, thanks for bringing me on to.
We appreciate
and
you
real
joining
quick,
them.
let's talk about.
I knew like if we did this one without you, you would kill me.
Ryan, jump in there, brother. What's up?
I just two quick things. For one, I don't want people to think that Ryan doesn't like naturalistic slow movies. You can't.
That's not what we're saying.
Sitting down and sit still for 30 minutes or 2 hours.
That's what I was thinking.
Like, no.
I was thinking that you're just a Luddite neophyte that just can't handle the art house cinema. That's what I was thinking. This whole conversation.
I love art house movies, so I was going to give you two. To me, what I consider naturalistic cinema, cinema verite, even if you want to call it that. It's like, obviously John Cassavetes is a woman under the influence, and then to me, Robert Altman's Nashville. To me, that's like a very accessible, watchable movie where you feel like you're watching people live in real time and for long shots, zooms, and whatever. Like they use the whole his whole cinematic bag of tricks. And so yeah, like to me, it's just like there's different. There's that kind of naturalism. Then there's like the Terrence Malick, and I would put this Barry Jenkins in this category, Wong Kar-wai naturalism, where it almost it's like they're trying to punish you. They're trying to say life is so fucking boring, and I want to show you exactly how boring it is. So watch this guy eat a whole sandwich.
Have you ever seen The Turin Horse by Bela Tarr? I mean, that's a film that punishes you about the mundanity and the repetition of life. And guess what? I fucking love that.
The Turin Horse for that sometimes. The Turin Horse is making its way onto the Show Me the Meaning bingo card alongside Wings of Desire for Austin. No, as long as we're recommending movies, if you really dig this movie and you like the kind of sort of like visual vocabulary it's playing in, there's a phenomenal film from a few years ago called The Fits, directed by Anna Rose Holmer, that has a similar like poetic vibe and explores some of these same themes from the perspective of a young black girl. And I fucking love it. It's a shame that she has not made any other movies besides that one. But that's The Fits. I think it's streaming on like Amazon if you want to check it out.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the discussion there. But before we get out of here, we want to do a couple things. One, normally we would go into the mailbag and we'd answer some voicemails and things like that. But what we want to do now is we got a lot of stuff. We've been getting an onslaught of stuff about Bo Burnham's Inside, which we love. But since we've been talking about it constantly, we kind of wanted to give it a little bit of a break. But what we want to do is we want to say, yes, definitely, please keep calling. Call us, email us. You can email us at movies@wisecrack.co. You can ask us questions, and you can call us and leave us a voicemail at 1-213-534-8807. That's 1-213-534-8807. But what we really want to ask now is for some suggestions. What films do you want us to talk about? So just fucking send us an onslaught of emails and voicemails. Keep them quick unless you have some sort of comment that you want to make, obviously on Moonlight or on anything else in our back catalog. But just send us an onslaught of suggestions of films that you really want us to cover, that you think we could sink our teeth into. So again, 1-213-534-8807. Or movies@wisecrack.co is for the email. And then we also want to just give a reminder to our, if you want to support us, you can support us over at Patreon. So go to patreon.com/wisecrack. That's patreon.com/wisecrack. Get access to the Discord and all kinds of other goodies. And patreon.com/wisecrack. So let's get out of here. Where can people find you on the internet? Rashawn, plug your podcast.
Yeah, at Cinephile Attack on Twitter and Instagram. When Cinephiles Attack, anywhere you get your podcasts. We just did Burlesque, another great gay movie. And we'll be doing Independence Day for July 4th. So check us out. Yeah, we just passed 50 episodes and we did a Disney Renaissance special. Nice, so that was really fun. And check us out.
Yeah, this past year with that podcast has been great, man. I've loved what you guys are doing over there.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me. So thank you.
Yeah, we love it. Ryan, where can people find you, brother?
Find me on Ryan Shorts on YouTube and stuff. And also, I released a musical on the Funhouse channel today. Woo, the musical. Also, one quick thing I want to talk. I have a beef with Barry Jenkins, the director of this movie, because his next film was called If Beale Street Could Talk. And I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Our most famous street is called Beale Street, but now there's a movie that confuses everyone because it's not about our Beale Street. It's about another Beale Street. So Barry, look, I love Moonlight. You saw this podcast, but we have to talk about If Beale Street Could Talk, okay? Because I got beef with that movie.
All right, Raymond.
Make my Beale Street.
You should actually make on Ryan's Shorts. You should make If Our Beale Street Could Talk. Then.
Yeah, it's just you standing on the corner shaking your fist at the heavens.
I have a lot of friends that
if Beale Street could scream. You can find me on Twitter. What was that?
Yeah, where can people find you, brother?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd. I'm at Crematoria. If you don't feel like going to the trouble of sending an email to Wisecrack with a movie suggestion, you can just scream at me on Twitter there. Austin and I are always on there busting each other's chops anyway. And I have a bone to pick with Barry Jenkins. Don't do Lion King 2.5 or whatever. make more Moonlights and If Beale Streets Could Talk.
All right, and if you want, you can find me on Twitter, Austin_Hayden. Find me on Insta, AUS_HAY. You can hit me up on TikTok, Austin.Hayden. I do a philosophy podcast called Owls at Dawn. I've got a YouTube channel, Austin Hayden, whatever, all the good stuff. You know the thing. Ryan, send us out of here, my friend.
Goodbye from Hollywood, California. This has been Show Me the Moonlight.